A woman calls the police on a doctor to harm him. Minutes later, she begs for help. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. In the heart of New York City, the night buzzed with a cacophony of distant sirens, honking cars, and hurried footsteps on the pavement. Claire Addison sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, her fingers trembling as she clutched her phone. The clock on the wall struck 10 p.m., but Claire's mind was miles away, replaying the events that had shattered her already fragile world. Her mother, Diana Addison, a spirited woman in her 60s, had been a pillar of strength throughout Claire's tumultuous life. But a month ago, Diana had been diagnosed with an aggressive illness that required immediate and experimental treatment. The doctor overseeing her case, Ethan Matthews, had assured Claire that every measure would be taken to stabilize her mother's condition. Despite his reassurances, Diana's health had deteriorated rapidly over the past 2 weeks. Claire had tried to believe in Dr. Matthews' expertise, but doubts crept in like an insidious fog. A friend had planted the seed of suspicion, hinting at rumors that Matthews sometimes bent ethical rules to pursue experimental treatments. Earlier that evening, after another grim update from the hospital, her grief twisted into fury. Gripping her phone tightly, Claire made a decision she would soon regret. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. Claire hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. I need to report illegal activity at Dr. Ethan Matthews' clinic, she stammered. Her voice grew stronger as she added, I believe he's endangering his patients. You need to investigate him before someone else gets hurt. The operator probed for details, and Claire fed them just enough to warrant action. The line disconnected, leaving Claire enveloped in an eerie silence. She sat back, her hands shaking, unable to believe what she had just done. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Your mother's condition is worsening. Please contact us immediately. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her mind reeled. What had she done? Uncertain, Claire grabbed her coat and rushed out into the cold city night. The streets seemed to close in around her, suffocating and relentless. She hailed a cab to the hospital, her conscience tearing at her resolve. How could she accuse the man who might be her mother's only hope? Yet it was too late. The wheels of her impulsive decision were already in motion. Arriving at the hospital, she burst into her mother's room. Diana was pale, her breathing labored. Claire, she murmured weakly, her voice barely audible. I'm here, Mom, Claire whispered, holding her mother's frail hand. As the minutes passed, guilt tightened its grip around her chest. Claire realized she wasn't just battling against a doctor she barely knew. She was fighting against herself, and the cost of her choices had just begun to unfold. The night had only just started, but Claire's actions would ignite a chain of events she could no longer control. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting a cold glow over the pristine corridors. Claire paced outside her mother's room, her mind spiraling with doubt and regret. She had barely slept, her thoughts tangled in a web of guilt and fear. The impulsive call to the police now felt like a betrayal, not only to Dr. Matthews but to herself. Her mother's nurse, a soft-spoken woman named Angela, approached her cautiously. Ms. Addison, I noticed you haven't left. Your mother's stable for now, but she's still in critical condition. Dr. Matthews will check on her soon. Claire's stomach churned. She nodded weakly, muttering a quick thank you. As Angela walked away, Claire felt the walls closing in. She couldn't escape the gravity of what she had done. Somewhere, she knew, the police were investigating Dr. Matthews based on her false accusations. An hour later, as dawn broke over the city, Claire heard voices down the hall. She peeked around the corner to see 2 police officers speaking with the hospital director. Anxiety coiled in her chest as she watched the director's face shift from confusion to concern. The officers handed over a folder, likely filled with the allegations she had fabricated. Inside her mother's room, Diana stirred awake. Her voice was faint, but clear. "Claire, why do you look so troubled? You should rest." Claire forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom, just thinking about your recovery." Diana reached for her daughter's hand, her grip weaker than Claire remembered. "You've always worried too much. Trust the doctor. He knows what he's doing." The words struck Claire like a blow. Trust. The very thing she had stripped from Dr. Matthews. She held her mother's hand tighter, nodding as tears threatened to spill. Later that morning, Claire decided she needed answers. Her guilt pushed her to investigate Dr. Matthews. If she was wrong, if her accusations were misplaced, she would have to face the consequences. She visited the hospital archives, a sterile room filled with rows of locked cabinets and computer terminals. "Excuse me," she asked a passing clerk, "can I see Dr. Matthews' credentials and patient reviews? I want to know more about him." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You'd need administrative clearance for that, but you can ask around. Dr. Matthews is well known for his work." Undeterred, Claire began questioning staff and patients who passed by. One woman, a middle-aged patient recovering from surgery, paused to answer. "Dr. Matthews saved my life," she said with conviction. "When others gave up, he didn't. He's unconventional, sure, but he cares." Another nurse chimed in. "He's a good man. People misunderstand his methods because he's always looking for new ways to treat tough cases." As the morning wore on, a clearer picture of Dr. Matthews began to emerge, one of dedication and innovation, not malpractice. The weight of Claire's actions grew unbearable. She recalled the phone call she had made, the accusation she had hurled out of frustration and grief. A nurse passed by, her voice hushed. "Dr. Matthews is being called in for questioning today," she whispered to a colleague. "Can you believe it? Someone accused him of illegal practices." Claire's pulse quickened. The gravity of her decision was about to hit its peak. Before she could process her next move, Dr. Matthews himself appeared in the hallway. His white coat was pristine, and his expression, though calm, held a hint of exhaustion. Claire froze as their eyes met. He gave her a polite nod and entered her mother's room, oblivious to the storm she had set in motion. Claire's heart pounded as she stood outside, torn between confessing her actions and remaining silent. Every moment felt like an eternity, and the consequences of her choice were inching closer by the second. Claire stood frozen outside her mother's hospital room as the faint murmur of Dr. Matthews's voice filtered through the door. Each word felt like a reminder of the chaos she had unleashed. She pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the doorframe, her mind battling guilt and indecision. She had thought her call to the police would expose a negligent doctor, but every new piece of information only deepened her regret. The hallway buzzed with activity. Nurses pushed carts laden with medical supplies, and the distant beep of monitors mixed with hurried conversations. Claire felt like an island in the midst of a storm, isolated and helpless. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, pulling her back to the moment. The message was short and urgent. "Ms. Addison, we've received troubling news. Please contact us regarding your mother's case immediately." Claire frowned. She hurried to the nurses' station, where Angela was filing charts. "I just got this message. What's going on with my mother?" Angela's usually calm demeanor faltered. "The lab results came back. It seems there was a misdiagnosis when your mother was first admitted. The treatment she received early on may not have been the right course." Claire's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Angela lowered her voice. "Dr. Matthews caught the error and adjusted the treatment protocol, but the earlier missteps worsened her condition. He's been trying to stabilize her since then." The truth struck Claire like a blow. Dr. Matthews wasn't the cause of her mother's decline. He had been fighting to save her from a mistake made by someone else. Her impulsive actions now felt like an even greater betrayal. She turned away, her mind racing. She needed to do something, but what? Her steps carried her down the hall to the administration office, where she demanded to speak with the director. Inside, a harried-looking man barely glanced up from his paperwork. "Ms. Addison, what can I do for you?" "I need to know who was responsible for my mother's initial diagnosis," Claire said, her voice trembling with urgency. The director sighed, flipping through files. Her case was first handled by a locum doctor, a temporary hire. "He's no longer with us." Dr. Matthews flagged the issue the moment he took over. Claire clenched her fists. The weight of her actions pressed harder. Not only had she falsely accused Dr. Matthews, but she had also delayed his work by drawing the police into a matter where they had no place. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of raised voices echoing through the halls. She stepped out of the office to see two officers confronting Dr. Matthews in the lobby. "Dr. Matthews, we need you to come with us for questioning," one officer said firmly. "What is this about?" he asked, keeping his tone measured. Claire's chest tightened as she watched. The doctor's calm composure in the face of their demands only deepened her shame. Unable to stay silent any longer, Claire stepped forward. "Wait!" she called out, her voice breaking. The officers turned to her, confusion written across their faces. "I'm the one who made the call," Claire confessed, her voice trembling. "I reported him, but I made a mistake. He's not at fault. He's trying to save lives." Dr. Matthews frowned, his gaze shifting to Claire. "You did what?" Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled through her explanation. "I was scared. My mother's condition worsened, and I thought you were the reason. But I was wrong. I didn't have the full picture, and now I've made everything worse." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain of how to proceed. Finally, Dr. Matthews spoke, his voice calm but firm. "If you want to help Ms. Addison, then let me get back to my work. Your mother needs me, and I can't do my job with this distraction." Claire nodded, her shame swallowing her words. As the officers hesitated, Dr. Matthews gestured toward them. "If you still need to investigate, you know where to find me, but right now I have patients waiting." The officers reluctantly stepped aside, and Dr. Matthews disappeared down the hall. Claire stood in the middle of the lobby, her heart heavy with regret and a newfound determination to make amends. The city's amber streetlights blinked to life as evening settled over the hospital. Claire sat slumped in one of the waiting room chairs, her head in her hands. The weight of her choices crushed her, making every breath feel like a battle. She had confessed to the police, but that wasn't enough. Dr. Matthews had brushed off her apology, prioritizing his patients over his pride, but Claire knew she had to do more. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Trust the doctor. He knows what he's doing." Diana's condition had shown no signs of improvement since Claire's call to the authorities. Now, she was running out of time. Angela's soft voice broke the silence. "Ms. Addison, you've been here all day. Would you like some water or something to eat?" Claire looked up, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Is Dr. Matthews still on the floor?" Angela hesitated. "He's in surgery. He's been working non-stop since morning." "Why do you ask?" "I need to talk to him," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I have to fix this." Angela frowned, but didn't press further. Claire waited, her nerves raw, until she saw Dr. Matthews emerge from the OR. His shoulders were slumped, and the lines of fatigue on his face were evident, but his eyes remained sharp. "Dr. Matthews," Claire called, standing abruptly. He stopped, his expression guarded. "Ms. Addison," he said coolly, "is there something you need?" I need your help," she admitted, her voice breaking. "My mother's condition, it's getting worse. I know I don't deserve your time, not after everything, but please don't give up on her." Dr. Matthews studied her for a moment. "This isn't about deserving, Ms. Addison. It's about what your mother needs. I haven't given up on her, despite what you might think." Claire's voice grew desperate. I know I've made a mess of things. I acted out of fear, and I see now that I was wrong. But she's all I have, and I'm terrified of losing her. Please, tell me what I can do to make this right. Doctor, Matthews sighed, his stern demeanor softening slightly. Making things right isn't always simple, Ms. Addison. But if you want to help, start by trusting the people who are trying to save her. That includes me. Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. I do trust you now. I didn't know what else to do. Oh, I thought I was protecting her, but I only made things worse. Dr. Matthews hesitated, then nodded. I need to review her charts and adjust her treatment plan. You can stay, but let me do my job. Claire nodded fervently. I'll stay. I'll do anything. As the doctor disappeared into his office, Claire sank back into her chair, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. Yet her relief was short-lived. Minutes later, Angela approached with urgency etched into her face. Ms. Addison, your mother's heart rate is dropping. She's coding. The word sent a jolt through Claire. She followed Angela to the ICU, where a team of nurses and Dr. Matthews worked furiously over Diana's fragile body. The room buzzed with tension as the monitor emitted a sharp, continuous beep. Clear! Dr. Matthews shouted, using the defibrillator. The jolt made Diana's body arch before collapsing back onto the bed. Claire watched from the doorway, her hands clasped tightly over her mouth. Every second felt like an eternity. After the third shock, the beeping turned rhythmic again, and the room exhaled collectively. Dr. Matthews stepped back, his face a mixture of relief and determination. He approached Claire, who stood trembling. She's stable for now, he said. But this was close, too close. I'm going to intensify her treatment tonight. Claire nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes to help her. Dr. Matthews gave her a long look before speaking. Then stay out of my way. Your mother doesn't need guilt or hesitation. She needs you to be strong. Claire nodded, his words hitting her like a challenge she couldn't refuse. She stood by her mother's bedside that night, silently vowing to make things right. The cost of her actions had been high, but she wasn't done fighting for redemption. The early morning light filtered through the hospital windows, painting the walls with a soft glow. Claire sat by her mother's bed, her fingers laced tightly around Diana's frail hand. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was a small comfort after the chaos of the night before. Diana remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but stable. Claire's thoughts churned endlessly. She replayed the moments leading up to this crisis, from her impulsive call to the police, to the scene in the ICU. Dr. Matthews had saved her mother's life despite the obstacles she had thrown in his path. The weight of her guilt was nearly unbearable. A sharp knock on the door pulled Claire from her thoughts. She turned to see Dr. Matthews standing in the doorway holding a tablet. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held a trace of exhaustion. How is she? Claire asked hesitantly. She's holding steady, he replied, stepping into the room. We've adjusted her medications and started a new course of treatment. The next 48 hours are critical. Claire nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. Dr. Matthews studied her for a moment, then set the tablet down on a nearby table. Ms. Addison, there's something you need to know, he said, his tone serious. Claire's stomach twisted. What is it? When I took over your mother's case, I discovered something unusual in her initial diagnosis, he began. I ran additional tests, which confirmed my suspicion. Your mother's condition was misdiagnosed from the start. The original physician overlooked a crucial detail. Claire's heart sank. So, this whole time, Dr. Matthews nodded. She was treated for the wrong illness initially. That's what led to her rapid decline. Once we corrected the course, her chances improved significantly. The revelation hit Claire like a punch to the gut. Her anger, her fear, her impulsive actions, they had all been based on incomplete information. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. I've caused so much damage." Dr. Matthews sighed, his expression softening. "I understand grief, Ms. Addison. It makes us do irrational things, but now we need to focus on your mother's recovery." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Later that morning, the hospital director entered the room with a somber expression. "Ms. Addison, may I have a word?" he asked, glancing at Dr. Matthews. "Of course," Claire said, her nerves prickling. The director hesitated before speaking. "We've closed the investigation into Dr. Matthews. The officers confirmed your statement and the case has been dismissed." Claire felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the director's next words. "However, the damage caused by the accusation has been significant. Dr. Matthews' reputation has taken a hit and we'll need time to rebuild trust with our patients." Claire's guilt deepened. "I'll take responsibility," she said firmly. "I'll go public and tell everyone the truth about what happened." Dr. Matthews raised a hand to stop her. "That won't be necessary," he said. "What matters is that your mother gets better and that we focus on the work ahead." The director nodded in agreement. "Your apology is enough for now. Let's leave it at that." Over the next 2 days, Diana's condition steadily improved. The new treatment plan was working, and her vital signs grew stronger with each passing hour. Claire stayed by her side, reflecting on the lessons she had learned through this ordeal. When Diana finally woke, her voice was soft but filled with warmth. "You've been here all this time." Claire smiled through her tears. "I wouldn't be anywhere else, Mom." As the weeks passed, Claire made it her mission to support the hospital in any way she could. She organized a fundraiser to help patients who couldn't afford care, working closely with the staff to build a bridge between the hospital and the community. Dr. Matthews, though reserved, acknowledged her efforts with a nod of approval. One evening, as Claire prepared to leave the hospital, she saw Dr. Matthews walking toward her. He extended a hand. "Ms. Addison, I wanted to thank you for stepping up. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." Claire shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make amends, and for saving my mother." Dr. Matthews offered a faint smile. "That's my job." As Claire walked into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. Redemption wasn't just about making amends, it was about learning, growing, and using those lessons to create a better path forward.